早晨
Good morning, Happy
早晨
Chinese New Year！
新年快樂！
祝大家咧嗱，呢啲要中文先講得到係咪？祝你咧新年進步，主恩常在。
So Pastor Betty is blessing everybody with some very nice Cantonese words.
I know many people weren't here last week, so why don't you now, right now, turn to the person behind you and say a blessing。同佢拜個年好唔好啊？上個禮拜我知好多人唔喺度係咪？
今日好開心見翻大家係咪啊？
同後邊拜完年就同你隔離嗰個拜年咯喎，好唔好啊
Yeah, just send a Chinese Lunar New Year greetings to somebody around you.
Yeah, I am praying for a blessed new year for everyone this year.
我正喺度真係為每一個人呢，希望今年真係有一個受祝福嘅一年呢，去默默嘅祈禱。
And I'm trusting for a breakthrough in every one of our lives.
我好相信我哋每一個人今年都會經歷到突破。
And that's why the book of Ecclesiastes is so important. We are beginning the year with the book of Ecclesiastes.
所以點解我哋用傳道書去開始我哋呢一年呢？係非常之重要啊！
So if you haven't been here and you haven't listened to the previous sermons, please go back and listen so you will know the flow of, the words of a preacher. That's what Ecclesiastes is.
如果你咧係錯過咗我哋之前咧傳道書嘅嗰啲信息咧，我真係鼓勵你咧翻去聽翻，因為你可以咧由頭嘅去到明白到成個信息嘅嗰個流程啊。
Because the book opens with the words of the preacher, which is Solomon. We know Solomon is the author of this book.
因為咧，其實傳道書一開始嘅時候咧，就係嗰位作者就係所羅門啦。我哋都知道佢自己親自講嘅一句説話。
He was someone who loved God.
佢係一個咧好愛主嘅人。
And he humbled himself before God because he knew he had to govern the people, so he asked for wisdom.
因為佢咧亦都係嚟到神嘅面前，佢謙卑佢自己咧，佢知道佢要管理咧屬神嘅子民，所以咧佢亦都嚟到神面前去求啊。
And God gave him wisdom. He became the wisest man on earth.
佢就向神去求智慧啦，而神亦都應許佢，佢成為呢個世界上最有智慧嘅人。
And we know Solomon ruled in the golden days of Israel. It was prosperous. They were wealthy. They were a great nation.
我哋知道咧，所羅門佢係統治以色列咧，係嗰個黃金時期，佢哋成為咧一個好大好強盛嘅國家。
And you can imagine, he was the king. He had everything. He had fame. He had family. He had fortune.
你可以想象佢一個偉大嘅王，佢真係擁有所有嘅嘢，名譽地位啦、家庭啦、所有嘅財富啦。
He had wisdom. He also had women.
佢有智慧啦，亦都有好多嘅女人。
Slaves. He had silver. He had everything.
佢有銀啦，佢亦都有好多嘅奴隸去為佢服侍佢啊。
And he lived many years, so you can imagine he collected a lot of his own experiences and observations of life, and that's in Ecclesiastes.
佢亦都係壽命係好長嘅，所以喺佢整個嘅人生裏面咧，佢留低咗好多佢嘅觀察同埋佢嘅經歷咧喺傳道書裏面。
And so in the first 3 weeks, we went through chapters 1 to 6, the first part of the book.
所以我哋頭3個禮拜咧，我哋就去睇傳道書嘅第1章到第6章。
And he talked about everything under the sun being the vanity of vanities.
提到咧喺日光之下，真係一切嘅事咧盡都虛空。
And he's basically saying life is short, life is brief, but is it worth living?
佢講緊生命的確係非常短暫嘅，但係亦都值得去活。
And we talked about no matter how much you gain, you possess in this life, you will still be empty. It's still vanity. It's still seemingly meaningless.
佢亦都講到，無論你生命裏邊你擁有幾多都好啦，到最後其實都係一切虛空，都係冇意義嘅。
Because he says in chapter 3, God has put eternity into our hearts. That's why nothing in this world, on earth, will satisfy you.
因為喺第3章佢講到神已經將永恆嘅呢個意念放喺我哋心裏面，所以在地上係冇嘢能夠滿足到我哋㗎。
And another part of Ecclesiastes, another theme, is about life's inconsistencies.
另外咧，亦都去到之後嘅章節咧，講到一個好重要嘅元素嘅就係生命充滿矛盾。
Yeah, we know, right? Good things happen to bad people, but bad things happen to good people.
我哋都知道啦，好人就會經歷衰嘢嘅，但係啲衰人咧，有時好似好風光嘅喎。
And that's why he also talks about what's the use of working hard, toiling, when no one remembers you, no one sees you.
佢亦都講到咧，其實都冇人睇到我哋做咩，冇人記得㗎。我哋咁辛勞、咁勞苦係為乜咧？
And he asks a lot of these questions.
佢問好多呢啲嘅問
And
題。
it is true. Life is unexpected, right? A lot of things happen in life unexpectedly.
的而且確，我哋都知道生命真係好多嘢發生，而有好多我哋都係冇辦法預測㗎。
And sometimes very unpleasant.
好多時候仲係令人好唔愉快，
And there are a lot of injustices in this world.
並且喺世界上充滿住不公義。
So how do we deal with that?
咁究竟我哋可以點樣面對呢？
And this is what we're talking about today.
今日我哋就要去睇一睇呢一個問題。
We're going to be looking at chapter 8.
我哋會一齊睇第8章。
You know, in English, there's a phrase. We say, who knows?
喺英文啦，我哋中文都有啊，係咪啊？有一句説話叫做邊個知啊？點知啫？
And it's true. We say that when we don't know what's happening or we don't understand, we say, who knows?
而真係好多時候，我哋都真係會講呢句説話，好真實。我哋真係點知啫？
And this is what Solomon opens with in chapter 8.
而所羅門亦都喺第8章嗰度咧，用咁樣嘅意念咧去開始喎。
Oh, verse 1, let's go into it. Who is like the wise? Verse 1. Who is like the wise? Who knows the interpretation of a thing?
第1節嗰度佢話8章1節嗰度話，誰像智慧人？誰知道事情的解釋呢？
Who is like the wise?
誰像智慧人呢？
Do you think you are wise?
你認為你係咪智慧人啊？
You know, there's a saying, the older, the wiser.
有一句説話咧，就話咧越老咧就越有智慧噶啦。
Who's over 50?
邊個呢一度係50歲以上噶？
Proud of it, right?
你應該充滿自豪咁樣樣
Are
去
you
講
older
㗎。
and wiser?
你感覺到自己越嚟越有智慧咧
Yesterday was 係咪琴日係人日好似係咪啊？個個都生日，個個都老咗一年啦，係咪？
Yeah, yesterday was a birthday for everyone in Chinese Lunar New Year.
Is it true, older the wiser?
係咪真係咧？係咪年紀越大越有智慧咧？
No, not really, right?
又好
We
似
know
唔
some
係。
people are older, they get dumber.
有啲
Sure.
人真係越老咧越愚笨噶。
Because sometimes we think, oh, we know more. We've gathered more experiences. I know more knowledge. I know this and I know that. I'm older. I've learned more than you. We think we are wiser.
係啊，好多時候我哋都以為咧，我哋越老咧，我哋爭取嘅知識越多啦，我哋知道嘅嘢越多啦，係咪啊？我又經驗多過你咧，我哋就以為我哋就係更有智慧啦。
But in fact, the older, the more stubborn.
但係有時越老咧就越固執。
So, you know, because wisdom is not just knowing things.
所以我哋知道咧，智慧唔係代表你知道好多嘢。
We all like to know things, right? We want to know this, we want to know that, we know such and such, we want to know things.
係啊，我哋個個都好想認識知道好多嘢啊，呢樣嗰樣乜嘢都想知。
We may have a pool of information and a well of knowledge, but you might not be very wise.
我哋可能係有一個好闊大嘅知識嘅 database， 但係或者我哋好淵博嘅學問，
Knowing is not enough.
但係都唔代表我哋有智慧。
Because wisdom is not just about being clever,
因為有智慧唔代表淨係代表聰明喎，
it's not being knowledgeable.
唔係代表你好有知
We know
識。
many people with PhD, doctors, top scholars, they are not very wise.
我哋知道有好多學士、博士，學問上好叻，但係都唔一定好有智慧。
Here it tells us who knows the interpretation of a thing.
佢講緊究竟邊個知道事情嘅解釋呢？
And another version says to analyze and to interpret things.
有其中一個譯本咧，亦都講到係其實去分析啦，同埋去理解事
So
情。
wisdom is the ability to interpret and understand things.
所以其實智慧咧，就係你能夠去明白、理解、詮釋事情。
We can know a lot, but we need to know how to apply
我哋可以知道好多嘢，但係我哋要知道點樣去實行。
the right time,
喺一個啱
The right
嘅時機，
occasion,
係一個啱
the
嘅時
right
候，
way.
係一個啱嘅方式。
wisdom.
智慧。
And then it's interesting because the same verse, it also tells us what a wise person looks like.
而且好有趣，同一節裏面都講咗俾我哋聽呢一個智慧嘅人咧，其實佢個樣係點㗎？
It says, a man's wisdom makes his face shine, and the hardness of his face is changed.
佢話人的智慧使他容光煥發，使他臉上的戾氣轉消。
Another version, English version, New Living Translation, it says, wisdom lights up a person's face, it brightens his appearance, and softening its hardness.
其中一個英文譯本咧，佢亦都咁樣去形容到啊，就係智慧咧，好似令到一個人嘅樣着燈咁樣，而且咧，亦都令到佢面上嘅嗰種光眼咧係會消失。
So what's in a person will affect what the outside looks like.
所以一個人內在係點咧，其實影響咗佢嘅外在嘅。
So this verse is interesting. It's not only about what a wise person does, but what wisdom does to a person.
所以呢一節咧好有趣，佢講到咧唔單單係智慧人去做啲咩啦，而係智慧呢樣嘢會令到人有啲乜嘢影響。
It makes your face shine and your heart soft.
佢會令到你容光煥發，並且你嘅內在都變得柔軟。
Is your face glowing?
你覺得自己容光煥發嗎？
You know, I think this is a very good Chinese New Year blessing. 我祝你容光煥發. Wow, means so much right now. Okay. Why don't you turn to the person next to you? I know you probably didn't say this before, right? 祝你容光煥發. No one would have thought of it, right? But now, say it to the person behind you, next to you. 祝你容光煥發.
Yeah, just find someone and bless him or her to glow in your face.
So every Chinese New Year from now on, okay? Say this blessing.
好，由今年開始啦，我哋從此我哋要識得祝人容光煥發。
And this is what chapter 8 is about.
呢個就係第8章開始發生咩事？
How to be wise.
點樣成為一個智慧
He's
人？
actually teaching us how to deal with difficulties in our lives.
佢亦都去教導我哋點樣去面對生命中遇上嘅困難。
We do, right? We have difficult situations. We also have difficult people in our lives.
我哋的確會遇上好多困難，而且都會遇到好多麻煩嘅人。
And how we respond to that will reflect whether we are wise.
而我哋點樣去應付面對呢？亦就係反映住啦，我哋有冇智慧呢？
Because follows this, chapter 8, verse 2, he continues. He says, obey the king. Since you vow to God that you would, don't try to avoid doing your duty and don't stand with those who plot evil. For the king can do whatever he wants. His command is backed by great power. No one can resist or question it.
我哋8章2節到4節佢咁講喎，我勸你，因為你指着神起了誓，你就要遵守王的命令，不要輕率離開王的面前，也不要參與惡事，因為王可以隨己意作任何事。既然王的話有權柄，誰敢問他你在作什麼？
So a wise person submits to authority.
所以佢講到一個有智慧嘅人呢，係會降服喺權柄底下㗎。
You know, Solomon is not promoting any kind of political agenda or theology. He's just saying this right out.
其實所羅門呢，佢並唔係去到提倡緊一種嘅政治理念啊、政治意識形態啊等等，佢就係好直接去講緊一件事啊。
And you know, in those days, the Eastern rulers, they have absolute power.
你知道嘛？當時寫呢個經文嘅嗰陣時，古代嘅近東嘅統治者咧，佢哋係有絕對嘅權力㗎。
They weren't elected by the people, so they're not answerable to the people. They can do whatever they want.
佢唔係咧被人民去推選出嚟，佢亦都唔會向人民去交代，佢哋自己中意做咩做咩。
They had the power of life and death, and they would use it.
並且佢哋係操控住生死之權嘅，而佢係真係會行使佢嘅權利嘅。
And he is saying a wise person's response is submission.
而佢就講到一個智慧嘅人，佢面對嘅方法咧就係順服。
You know, if the king had absolute authority, wouldn't it be unwise if you provoke his wrath?
如果呢一個統治者佢係真係有絕對嘅權力嘅話，而你去激起佢嘅憤怒，咁係唔係有智慧呢？
So the question is for us today to put it into context, how do you relate to those that are above you?
所以如果將呢個問題放喺我哋今日嘅背景度，就係其實去問我哋點樣去面對嗰啲會向我哋行使佢嘅權力嘅人呢？
How do you relate to those that can exercise power over you? Who are the people that are in authority over you?
我哋點樣去面對嗰啲喺權柄嘅位置，而佢係會行使佢嘅權力喺我哋身上嘅人呢？
Do you submit to your parents?
我哋能唔能夠順服我哋嘅父母？
I think most of us work, right? Do you submit to your employer?
而且我哋好多人都知啦，我哋都有僱主，我哋能唔能夠順服我哋嘅僱主呢？
Do you submit to your husband, wives,
我哋能唔能夠順服我哋嘅丈夫呢？妻子們，
the government?
仲有我哋嘅政府，
Because God has placed them above you.
因為神將呢一啲嘅權柄放喺我哋之上，
We submit because of God, and that is biblical.
而我哋因着神嘅緣故去順服呢一啲嘅權柄，係合乎聖經嘅。
In Romans 13, chapter 13, verse 1 to 5, it says this, Let every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those that exist have been instituted by God. For rulers are not a terror to good conduct, but to bad. Would you have no fear of the one who is in authority? Then do what is good, and you will receive his approval. For he is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain. For he is the servant of God, an avenger who carries out God's wrath on the wrongdoer. Therefore, one must be in subjection, not only to avoid God's wrath, but also for the sake of conscience.
喺呢個羅馬書13章1到3節。1到5節，1到5節 ，OK。政府的權柄，人人都應當服從，因為沒有一樣權柄不是從神來的，掌權的都是神設立的，所以抗拒掌權的，就是反對神所設立的，反對的人必自招刑罰。執政的不是要使行善的懼怕，而是要使作惡的懼怕。你想不怕掌權的嗎？只要行善，就會得到稱讚。4到5節，因為他是神的僕役，是對你有益的。但如果你作惡，就應當懼怕，因為他佩劍不是沒有作用的。他是神的僕役，是向作惡的人施行刑罰的。所以你們必須服從。不但是因為刑罰，也是因為良心的緣故。
It says here in this scripture, we submit because it's authority from God.
呢度好清楚講到，我哋順服權柄嘅原因係因為呢一個係神設立嘅權柄。
They have been placed there by God because they are God's servants.
因為佢哋係神嘅僕役，佢哋係被神放喺嗰啲位置㗎。
And then in verse 4 and 5, it says, Otherwise, you will face the wrath of God.
而喺第4到5節就講到，如果唔係嘅話呢，你就要面對神嘅憤怒啦。
You submit for your good.
你順服係為着你自己嘅好處。
Turn to the person next to you and say, It's for your good.
話俾你隔離嗰個知係為你嘅好處，
係為你好㗎。
係為你好㗎。It's for your good.
I know, this is hard.
我知道咧係好困難㗎，
But this is what the Bible says.
但係的確係聖經所寫。
I know it's easy for us to set up our own standards, whether that person is worthy or not of our submission.
的而且確，我哋好容易會喺內心有一個嘅指標，就係究竟嗰個人佢值唔值得我哋去順服呢？
Most of us, we work, right? 我哋打工仔嚟嘅，邊個係打工仔？
Who are workers here？
I know, probably you're thinking, my boss is not as clever as me.
可能我哋有時都會諗到嘅，其實我嘅 boss 真係冇我咁醒啊。
Maybe your boss is younger than you. You're thinking, I'm older than you, I'm more experienced.
甚至乎咧，你嘅上司係後生過你，你知道你嘅經驗係比佢多。
Or maybe your leader, maybe your kingdom group leader, or your husband. He's not as knowledgeable as I am.
或者係你嘅領袖啦，你嘅小組長啦，你嘅丈夫啦，可能你都會覺得其實佢都冇我識嘅嘢咁多喎。
And you're probably thinking, they don't deserve my submission.
可能你真係諗緊，其實佢哋真係唔值得我去順服咯。
But you know what?
但係你知嘛？
The motivation to submit is not in the worthiness of that person.
我哋去順服嘅背後嘅動機，唔係基於嗰個人配唔配得我哋去順服。
We submit because of the worthiness of the position God has put that person in.
而係基於神將呢一個人放咗喺權柄嘅嗰個位置上，係因着神係自己設立嘅。
There will be difficult people.
真係會有麻煩嘅
Some are
人㗎，
even unreasonable.
有好多仲係好唔合理
But
添。
we submit to the worthiness of the position that God has put that person in.
但係我哋順服嘅係神所設立嗰個權柄嘅位置。
And then he adds, verse 5 to 6, those who obey him will not be punished. Those who are wise will find a time and a way to do what is right. For there is a time and a way for everything, even when a person is in trouble.
而佢繼續咧喺5節到6節去到解釋，遵守命令的必不遭受禍患，智慧人的心曉得時機，懂得判斷，各樣事務成就都有合宜的時機和定局，儘管人嘅災禍重壓在自己嘅身上。
Remember, he asked this right at the beginning. Who is like the wise?
記唔記得佢一開始喺度問緊，究竟邊個像智慧人呢？
And he's answering it right here. A wise person will find a time and a way to do what is right, the proper time and the just way.
而個答案呢，就係呢一個章節啦。佢話如果智慧嘅人呢，就能夠曉得時機，懂得判斷。智慧人能夠揾一個合宜嘅時機同埋合適嘅方法去到做適當嘅決定。
A wise person will understand and be able to interpret the proper time. And we call this timing, the right timing.
所以一個有智慧嘅人呢，佢能夠明白同埋洞察到嗰個適合嘅時機啊。
And there are no easy answers.
的而且確真係唔容易㗎。
And we have to realize no matter how wise you are, there are still limitations.
我哋都知道，無論我哋幾有智慧都好啦，依然都係有限制嘅。
Because then he goes on in verse 7, he says, Indeed, how can people avoid what they don't know is going to happen? None of us can hold back our spirit from departing. None of us has the power to prevent the day of our death. Verse 7, chapter 8, verse 7.
傳道書8章7節，佢一路講7到8節啦。他不知道將來的事，其實將來如何，誰能告訴他呢？沒有人能掌握生命，將生命留住，也沒有人有權力掌管死期。這場爭戰無人能免，邪惡也不能夠那行邪惡的人。
So what is he saying? He's saying as wise as he is, he still cannot predict the future.
所以所羅門係講緊啊，就算如佢咁有智慧嘅人咧，佢自己都冇辦法預測將來。
No one can predict the day of the death.
亦都冇人能夠預測邊一日係死期。
I mean, like Kimiko just shared, right? No one can predict the day of the death.
係啊 ，Kimiko 啱啱就同我哋分享咧，冇人會預測到究竟嗰個人係幾時死㗎。
Only God knows.
只有神知道。
But we have to trust that God will give us wisdom, especially when we are dealing with difficult people and difficult situations. He will give us a way.
但係我哋能夠相信嘅係靠住神，神會帶領我哋，俾我哋智慧，知道一個適合嘅時機，去到面對嗰啲困難嘅人同埋事。
I remember a long, long time ago when I just started pastoring.
我好記得好耐之前呢，我啱啱開始作為一個牧師嘅時候
I had to do a funeral for a family.
我需要咧去為一個家庭咧主持喪禮。
And that funeral, the mother passed away. The mother was a Christian, but the family wasn't.
個媽媽咧就去世啦，而媽媽本身係基督徒，但係佢嘅家庭就唔係嘅。
And so the son had to do a Christian funeral because it was the mother's dying wish.
而個仔仔咧，佢好想去按住佢媽媽死前嘅遺願咧，就去搞一個基督教嘅喪禮儀式。
And he didn't want to.
不過佢係唔想㗎。
He didn't like Christians.
佢亦都唔喜歡基
He
督
didn't
徒。
like the church.
佢唔喜歡教會。
And he just didn't like us.
佢總之就唔中意我哋啦。
And he was big.
佢好大份嘅，
tall.
超級高，
And he was very rich.
而且好有錢。
So you can imagine the first meeting I had with him.
你可以想象下我第一次同佢會面係點㗎？
I'm small.
我又細粒啦，
I was younger than him.
我比佢年輕喎，
And I am a woman.
同埋我係一個女性。
And I remember it so well because he wasn't talking to me, he would talk down at me.
我好記得佢同我講嘢咧，基本上隻眼唔係望我㗎，係咁樣好似睇唔起我咁同我講嘢㗎。
Yeah, he talked to me like this.
佢係咁樣同我講嘢㗎。
And everything that, we planned, we organized, there was something he didn't like. He would criticize everything.
無論咧我哋嘅計劃裏面有啲乜嘢安排處理都好咧，佢總係揾到啲嘢唔中意嘅，好多嘢佢都唔喜歡。
I don't know whether you've ever had someone that looked down on you.
唔知你有冇經歷過咧？有人去睇唔起你啊？
It feels bad.
真係好難受。
And it was about 3 weeks. I had to have meetings with him and organize. And every time I would just pray to God.
我 同佢咧呢一個相處大概都有3個禮拜咁長嘅時間，要安排好多嘅嘢。每一次咧，我就嚟到神嘅面前去禱告。
And I would say, God, make me smart.
我就同神講：神啊，你幫助我醒啲啦！
係啊，醒啲啊 ！Don't let me say the wrong thing because otherwise he will pick on me.
幫我咧唔好講錯嘢，如果唔係咧，佢又捉我噶啦。
I don't know about you. Do you do this? You imagine in your head what you would say so you sound smart.
唔知你有冇試過咧？就係你講之前，你諗定自己將要講啲乜嘢，等你咧聽起上嚟好似醒啲咁啊！
And I wanted to win him. I wanted to say, prove that I'm right, you're wrong.
而且咧，我好想咧喺佢面前咧，去到證明咧，我係啱嘅，你係錯嘅。
And I would pray.
所以我都祈禱噶。
But you know what?
但係你知嘛？
God spoke to me.
神就同我講啦，
He said, you don't need to prove yourself.
你係唔需要去證明自己。
What you really need is not being smart or not say the wrong thing.
你真正需要嘅唔係去變得醒啲或者講啱嘢。
You're not just to act professionally.
你亦都唔需要去表現好專業。
You need to act pastorally.
你要有一個牧者嘅心腸。
He said, you need compassion.
你需要係一個憐憫嘅心。
And when I received that,
當我去領受到神咁
it
同我
was just like
講，
a load off my back.
就好似咧我所有嘅負擔都卸去啦。
I began to see things in a different way.
我開始睇佢哋嘅事情咧有唔同喎。
And I was able to minister and even talk to this person without feeling any bitterness at all.
而我開始能夠咧真係去關心佢服侍呢一個人，而內心咧係唔感覺到苦毒嘅喎。
Yes, I did a professional job.
冇錯，我係做緊一個專業嘅工作。
And it was a good funeral.
呢個成個喪禮係好順利嘅，
But I also did a pastoral job.
但我同時都做咗個牧養嘅工
I
作。
tried to minister and show love to the family.
我嘗試去俾佢哋愛同埋關懷去服侍佢
And
哋。
you know what? At the end of the service, the funeral service,
到最後喪禮嘅時候咧，
he came up to me.
佢就嚟到我嘅面前啦。
First time, eye to eye.
第一次首次，佢隻眼係望住我隻眼嘅。
He said, thank you.
佢同我講多謝你，
And I felt he meant it.
然後我就好 feel 到
He was sincere.
佢係好真誠噶，
You know what? It's true.
真噶。
In difficult times with difficult people, God will give you a way.
喺困難嘅處境，面對困難嘅人，神係會俾你一個出路。
Trust that God, in every difficult situation and with difficult people, He will provide what you need.
你去相信，當你面對困難嘅處境，面對好麻煩嘅人，神係會供應你需
He
要
will
嘅嘢。
guide you. He will lead you.
佢會帶領你，佢會引領你，
He will give you what you need to overcome.
佢會俾你需要去勝過跨過嘅嘢。
Amen.
阿門。
And then he moves on. The preacher moves on. After he talks about how to respond to authority, then he talks about life's mysteries. How do we deal with that?
當佢講完呢，我哋點樣處理麻煩嘅人同事之後呢，佢就去講關於生命嘅無常，我哋點樣面對呢？
In verse 9, he says, I have thought deeply about all that goes on here under the sun, where people have the power to hurt each other.
佢話9節，這一切我都見過，我專心考察日光之下所發生嘅一切事，有時這人管轄那人，令他受害。
And then he goes on from verse 10 and then verse 14. He says, verse 10, I have seen wicked people buried with honor. Verse 14, good people are treated as though they were wicked, and wicked often treated as though they were good.
去8章10節開始係嘛？10節同14節就話啦，然後我看見惡人得以埋葬，他們生前在聖地往來，而在他們這樣行的城中，竟被人遺忘，這也是虛空。14節，在世上有一件虛空的事，就是義人照惡人所行的受報應，惡人照義人所行的得報償。我說這也是虛空。
You know, Solomon is being very real here.
所羅門講嘅嘢咧係非常真實。
He is saying the wicked will get away with it.
佢話咧嗰啲壞人咧有可能係會得到報償噶，
And they get a better deal.
而且仲會得到好好嘅待遇。
Whereas the good people, they wind up losing.
調翻轉嗰啲好人義人咧，卻係會受到報應，好
They are
慘，
treated unfairly.
並且被不公平對待。
Like we said, why do good things happen to bad people, but bad things happen to good people?
係咯，點解好人嘅遭遇就係咁慘，但係啲衰人咧就有好報嘅咧？
It's unfair.
真係唔公平，
It's very frustrating, right?
非常令人沮喪嘅係嘛？
But then Solomon says this.
但係所羅門佢呢度話，
He's saying, the way we evaluate the wicked is not by what we see.
但係佢講到，當我哋去到衡量或者去睇嗰啲壞人嘅時候咧，唔係用我哋嘅肉眼去衡量嘅喎，
Don't evaluate the wicked by what we see.
唔好睇佢哋嘅下場咧，係單單憑我哋嘅眼見啊，
But by what you know.
但係憑我哋所知道嘅嘢，
What you know.
我哋所知道嘅嘢，
Say with me, no.
一齊講知道。
Because in verse 12, Solomon says this, even though a person sins 100 times and still lives a long time, I know that those who fear God will be better off. The wicked will not prosper, for they do not fear God. Their days will never grow long like the evening shadows.
12節佢就講到，罪人既然作惡百次，還享長壽，那麼我知道敬畏神的人，就是在他面前存敬畏的心的，必享福樂。惡人卻沒有福樂，也得不到長壽。他好像影子的短暫，因為他在神面前不存敬畏的心。
There are many things we do not know,
真係有好多嘢我哋都冇辦法知道，
but we do know those who fear God, it will be well.
但係我哋知道嘅就係嗰啲敬畏神嘅人必享福樂。
There are so many injustices,
充滿住好多嘅不公義啊！
and we will never know why.
我哋永遠都揾唔到點解嘅。
But we do know those who fear God will do well.
但係我哋知道嗰啲敬畏神嘅人係會得享福樂㗎。
Verse 16 to 17, he says this, when I applied my heart to know, I'm going to end with this, chapter 8, verse 16, 17. When I applied my heart to know wisdom and to see the business that is done on earth, how neither day nor night do one's eyes see sleep. Verse 17, then I saw all the work of God that man cannot find out. The work that is done under the sun. However much man may toil in seeking, he will not find it out. Even though a wise man claims to know, he cannot find it out.
我咧會用呢一節去到完結啊，傳道書8章16至到17節。我專心認識智慧，察看世上的勞碌，有人晝夜不眠。於是我看見了神的一切作為，知道在日光之下所發生的事，人不能查明。儘管人勞碌尋查，總是查不出來。即使智慧人以為知道了，還是查不出來。
In this verse, one verse, he repeats this 3 times. Man cannot find out.
就喺呢短短2節，佢重複咗3次，人係查不出來㗎。
Yes, we don't understand why, and sometimes we will never know.
係啊，我哋有時真係唔明白，而且我哋永遠可能冇辦法知道點解㗎。
We just have to admit we are human.
我哋就係要去承認，我哋係人咯。
We are human.
我哋係人咯。
Are you human?
你係咪人啊？
Turn to the person next to you and say, I am a human.
話俾你隔離個知，我係人嚟㗎咋。
That's the ignorance of man.
呢個就係人有佢嘅無知啊。
We are just human.
我哋係人嚟㗎。
Because if you read throughout chapter 7, chapter 8, chapter 9, chapter 10, chapter 11, right up to chapter 12, he repeats this. Who can find out? Man does not know. You do not know. He keeps repeating this.
的而且確由第7章一路講到去第12章，佢不斷地重複就係邊個可以知道啊？你係人，我係人，其實冇人可以揾得出真正點解㗎。
So how should we handle life's inconsistencies?
咁我哋究竟點樣去面對人生好多嘅矛盾同困難呢？
Just admit that we are human.
就去承認我哋係人咯。
So many things we do not know.
的確有好多嘢我哋冇辦法知道，
Focus on what you do know,
但係我哋聚焦喺我哋知道嘅嘢上面，
and that is fear God.
就係去敬畏神。
We do know this, fear God.
我哋知道敬畏神。
Because in chapter 12, 13 to 14, he says this, the end of the matter all has been heard. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. For God will bring every deed into judgment with every secret thing, whether good or evil.
傳道書12章13節到14節，亦都係最後2節，佢咁樣講：你們一切都聽見了，總而言之，應當敬畏神，謹守他的誡命，因為這是每一個人的本分。人所作的每一件事，連一切隱藏的事，無論是善是惡，神都必審問。
Who knows?
邊個知啊？
Who knows?
邊個知啊？
God knows.
神知道。
God knows.
神知道。
Leave it to God.
交俾神啦。
So not only do we fear God, number 2, He gives us another instruction. And truly, we are going to finish here. Sorry, one more verse. Chapter 8, verse 15. He says, I commend joy. You will like this verse. This is a good verse. I commend joy. For man has nothing better under the sun but to eat and drink and be joyful. For this will go with him in his toil through the days of his life that God has given him under the sun.
的而且確頭先講到啦，第一樣嘢係敬畏神啦，仲有一樣喎，我真係用呢一個呢，希望作今日嘅總結就係傳道書8章15節話：於是我稱頌快樂，因為人在日光之下最好是吃喝快樂，這是人在日光之下神賜給他一生的年日裏從自己勞碌中所得的享受。
Enjoy life.
享受你嘅生命
That's what Solomon is saying. Enjoy life.
係啊，好多人都咁樣講，係咪享受人生啦？
No, Solomon is saying that. Enjoy life.
而所羅門都係講緊啊，享受你嘅生命啊！
Delight in the fruit of your labors, your hard work.
喺你勞碌中所得嘅份，所吃喝嘅，你去喜樂啊！
Celebrate.
喺當中去到慶祝啊！
I know so many people that work so hard, but they don't celebrate.
我知道有好多人咧，佢真係好勤奮去做嘢嘅，但係佢唔會慶祝噶。
But you know what? Here Solomon is reminding us. Enjoy life.
所羅門喺呢度就提醒我哋啦，我哋要去享受噶。
You know, I do that with my girls. Every time finish an exam, I don't wait for the results. After the exam, we go have a buffet.
我同我兩個女女我都會咁樣做噶。當每一次咧佢哋考完試咧，我唔理個結果係點啊，總之佢哋考完試咧，我哋就一齊去食 buffet。
They used to ask us why.
佢哋都會成日問我。
Wait for the exam.
佢哋都會問啊，唔使等咗結果出嚟先決定去唔去慶祝嘅咩？
No, they worked hard. Enjoy the fruit of your labors.
唔需要啊，因為佢哋已經勞苦，佢哋出盡力去做，我哋就可以去享受啦。
Work hard and enjoy because life is a gift from God.
讓我哋去勞碌，但係同時都讓我哋去享受，因為生命係神俾嘅禮物。
In 1 Timothy 6:17, I didn't write it out, but you know, God gives you richly all things to enjoy.
喺提摩太前書咧6章17節嗰度，佢有講到咧，神佢去係俾我哋乜嘢？係厚賜百物俾我哋去享用噶。
Enjoy what you have now.
去享受神俾你而家有嘅嘢。
Do everything with gratitude, and this word I made up, and gratitude.
當你做每一樣事情嘅時候咧，你要懷住感恩嘅心，同埋咧，我創作咗呢一個字啊，就係懷住一個歡喜嘅心。
Yeah, gratitude and gratitude.
感恩嘅心同埋歡喜嘅心。
Yes, it's going to be difficult. It's going to be hard. You have to do it anyway. You might as well just enjoy it.
係啊，冇錯，的而且確好難嘅，未必係容易做噶。但係你就懷住一個感恩歡樂嘅心去享受去做咯。
Our life on earth may be brief.
我哋人生在世係好短暫，
but it can be good.
但係都可以係美好噶，
And it can be beautiful.
可以係美麗噶。
You know, leave it to God for God to judge.
留俾神去做嗰個最後嘅判決。
Don't take up that job yourself.
唔好自己去孭上呢個重擔。
You know, I know there are people that you're unhappy with.
我知道身邊我哋都會遇到一啲令到我哋唔開心嘅人。
And there are things in your life right now that you're unhappy with.
而家呢一刻就有事情係令到我哋個心唔舒服噶。
Leave it to God.
交俾神。
Leave it to God for His judgment.
交俾神，讓神去判決啊。
Don't let those things, these inconsistencies, these troubles, these burdens, hold you back from enjoying your life.
唔好讓呢啲嘅矛盾、呢啲嘅包袱、呢啲嘅唔開心去阻住你能夠去享受你嘅人生。
It's just not worth it.
其實係唔值得噶。
You know, I'm just going to ask every one of us to stand up. We're going to pray.
我希望邀請你哋每一位咧站立，我哋會一齊去祈禱。
And I think, you know, the first thing we need to do is to admit that we are human.
第一樣嘢，我哋需要喺禱告中咧，就係去承認我哋係人啊。
Shall we worship and just admit that we are human? You are God.
讓我哋去敬拜神，並且去到承認我哋係人，而你係神。
Come on, let's worship.